Hi, everyone. Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Just a minute, sorry. Okay, so my name is Karen Gueta. I'm from Israel. And I will talk today about barriers and facilitator of help-seeking behavior among Israeli men. It's a qualitative research that we made in Israel. So we know that help-seeking among IPV victims is a multi-phased behavior that varies across a range of individual, interpersonal, and socio-cultural factors. But although all IPV victims experience barriers to help seeking, some factors have been found to particularly influence help seeking for IPV among men. Men may face gender-specific internal and external barriers to help seeking that they are associated with hegemonic masculinity norms and ideals. We know that victimization might be seen to threaten masculinity because it takes men into a symbolic space of femininity, which intensifies shame and self-blame that deter men from help-seeking. We know that, this is also true for Israel, that there is a limited availability of services, of professional focus on the women, or ineffectiveness in addressing men's needs for support have all been documented as external barriers that deter men from help-seeking. So, but in the last year, there's been also research about a facilitator to help seeking. It's mostly relates to the fatherhood experience. So we wanted to test in the Israeli, context what are the barriers facilitators, and I would like to talk about the Israeli context because we know that the social cultural comparison between societies is very important, and this is one of the reasons why this conference is so important, because we know that, for example, in Israel, this is a photo of a very famous humoristic costume. This is a holiday in Israel that is parallel to Halloween. And men, some of men are, they are like, their costume is to, what is written on this shirt of this man is that I am married to a very nervous woman that she hits me or something like that. So we know that the opposite is impossible. There is no costume of women that she's saying I'm a beaten woman. But when it comes to men, it's very funny for a lot of people, and this is some kind of costume. But I think that all this this atmosphere of humor about men as victims of IPV, this is maybe similar to other countries. But the Israeli context is very unique because of the gender context. It is a mixed gender context. Women in Israel have equal rights and education status by law, but everyday life is still dominated by the traditional values of male-dominated society, with lower participation of men in childcare and house work compared to other countries. This has been associated with the central role played by the religious and the country's continual state of war, creating a militaristic and family orientation. So we know that the man as a fighter is a masculine identity very famous in Israel. This may promote the performance of manliness, which can lead to the use of violence by Israeli men. So our research aim was to obtain an in-depth understanding of the decision-making of men, and also the barrier and the facilitators of formal and informal help seeking. Our theoretical perspective was hegemonic masculinity, of course, but we wanted to combine it with contemporary masculinity theories that highlights the cultural and the economic transformation that creates new forms of masculinity and can impact the perception of male victims of IPV, but are seldom incorporated in the IPV studies. And so this inclusive masculinity theoretical perspective suggests that culturally valued male identities are becoming less structured around hegemonic forms of power relations. We know that more inclusive forms of masculinity characterized by greater tolerance throughout practice and attitudes that were once considered feminine, such as nurturing and submissiveness and empathy, are being accepted. So we wanted to understand how these new forms of masculinity shapes the decision-making and the facilitators and barriers to help seeking. So our sample was 17 Israeli men. They identified themselves as having sustained any type of IPV, at least 6 months by a female partner. So we found out that barriers to help thinking were related to hegemonic masculinity. Our participant identified internal barriers to help seeking that critically and explicitly indicated external masculinity ideals that they had internalized as preventing them from seeking help. For example, some refer to masculinity ideals of self-reliance to explain their reluctance to seek help. But as you can see from this quote, this participant not only shared the self-reliance as a deterrence for as a barrier for seeking help, but he further explained his reluctance to turn to the police for help, given the intensified ideal of self-reliance in the Israeli socio-cultural context, shaped by a militaristic and socialization process associated with the compulsory military service. So he specifically compared himself to European, American, or Canadian men, and explain why he didn't turn to the police. So this is one barrier that is related to hegemonic masculinity. Another barrier was recognizing IPV, and this barrier was related to the failure to recognize behavior as IPV. It seems to be related to the participant excusing the partner's behavior and taking responsibility for it. And this is what hindered their help seeking. And as you can see from this quote, and I think that this is very similar to other cultures. But we also saw that men's inability to recognize their victimization was portrayed not only as the result of their internal cognitive process, but rather they also perceived it as related to institutional inability to recognize and address non-physical abuse, such as the psychological abuse. And the third barrier that we identified was related to family values. For example, this man told us about his parents that they said, we see that the relationship between, we can see in this quote, the relationship between the conservative view that they sacrifice the marriage institution with minimalization of IPV harm, by using the Hebrew slang word for klafte, for a bitch. So they are minimalizing the abuse that he was experiencing. In another example, invoking the feminine characteristic of nurturing, family ideas of obligation and commitment were used to justify staying in abusive relationship. This man told us about his daughter asking him, why don't you leave her, his abusive partner? And he told them, I told her, Mom is one of us. She's crazy, but she's still one of us. This man suffered an abuse for 20 years. So we wanted to understand not only the barriers to help seeking, but also the facilitator. So we asked the participant, what encouraged you to look for help? And we saw that the facilitator were as a mirror for not recognizing IPV. When they finally recognize IPV, they turn to help. But in most of the cases, they were getting help also to recognize. For example, this quote, and the analysis suggests that the cognitive appraisal shifts in reframing partner behavior as IPV promoted help seeking. But this rephrasing was included as enacting feminine notions of vulnerability and interdependence. A participant described this as a gradual process initiated by the participant admission of vulnerability, in most cases to informal sources that recognize IPV, which resulted in successful help thinking. For example, this participant described a transformative conversation with his friends about the surveillance, aggression, and humanization that he is experiencing. In response, his friend encouraged him to reframe the partner behavior in terms of control, and what eventually led him to seek help. Another facilitator was help seeking. Help seeking was access to online social network, and these participants, for example, he experienced 2 abusive behaviors, and in the first one, he didn't have any access to online social network, and now access to online social networks provide support and solidarity, and this is based on shared destiny. This reflecting feminine ideals of caring and interdependence. Participants describe these virtual social spaces as one that allowed them emotional expression, such as identification, as well as real-life activities, such as caring for children. Another facilitator for help seeking was the fatherhood role. According to some of the participants, the role as fathers served to facilitate their help seeking, to protect and maintain the relationship with their children. The fatherhood role was consisted from both masculine ideas of agency and struggle, as well as feminine ideals such as care and sacrifice. This was described as facilitating engagement with treatment services to restore their parental rights. This participant described the response to the threat to his parental rights by the authorities. He is prepared to engage in treatment and develop his parental identity. So if we look at the conclusion, we see that the reformulation of masculinity that included both hybrid and caring masculinity identities might be essential to countering the threat to masculinity that posted by male victimization. And of course, in line with other research that were presented in this conference, we see that we need to develop specific services, programs for men, hotlines that enables them to get help and to recognize the IPV that they are experiencing. And we need to find out screen and assessment perception regarding the failure to comply with the hegemonic gender norms. Thank you.